Further discussion to the bill, Senator Franzen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the A109 amendment.
Senator Franzen offers the A109 amendment. The Secretary will report the amendment.
I do. Senator Franzen moves to amend House File Number 2414 as amended pursuant to Rule 45, page 337, after line 24. Insert. This is the A109 amendment.
Senator Franzen.
Thank you, Mr. President. And this amendment simply adds to the working group that's already in the bill to also advise the legislature on the use of raw cannabis in medical cannabis program and include an assessment on public health and consumer safety, as well as the potential cost savings for registered patients of the program. So members, we've heard over and over again since we passed legislation a few years back to establish the medical cannabis program that the cost is prohibitive to many patients, and not just the inability to access the dispensaries, but the main issue has been cost. And other states have passed, including Republican states, have passed the ability to use raw cannabis in the medical program. And for members to understand, I also sent out a couple of articles on this. The cost can go down drastically, 40% or more with this, because the processing is a lot cheaper than what the current program allows for in the Minnesota program. Additionally, I'm trying to hear. Members.
Senator Franzen, please hold. Members, it's getting a little loud. I know it's getting late, but let's keep the volume down. Senator Franzen.
Members, this is an issue of just allowing the legislature to understand whether this is something that we want to do. We discussed it in committee, but I think it's appropriate that the next step would be to discuss whether the medical program would benefit from having raw cannabis included. It does not make a decision whether it will be or not. That would be left potentially for us in the legislature, unless, I guess, yes, it would be the Minnesota legislature who would make that change. But this would allow us to get information and make informed decisions on whether we want to proceed in that direction. So, members, I encourage your support, and I ask for a roll call.
A roll call has been requested. Roll call will be granted. Discussion on the A109 amendment. Senator Benson.
Mr. President, I'm just clarifying. In the existing work group with the Commissioner of Health, Commissioner of Commerce, Agriculture, Public Safety, and the Board of Pharmacy, they would be, if this amendment goes on, they would be allowed to discuss the use of raw cannabis in the medical cannabis program. Senator Franzen, is that a correct understanding of this amendment?
Senator Franzen will yield. Senator Franzen.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Benson, my intent is that this will be discussed. I guess we can look into in conference committee who would be appropriate, but within the working group, you can argue all of those people that you mentioned have potential stake in this debate. The other piece I wanted to mention, Mr. President, that I neglected to is the impression that this is going to be smoked, like you traditionally smoke cannabis or other ways of using it. In the medical program, it's a very specific and very narrow and very regulated. It would not be something that looks like flour or what you would normally attribute to the use of recreational cannabis. In the medical program, it's labeled, it's restricted, it looks very differently. It's not going to be, it's just the actual extraction of it is going to look differently. So members, that's why we need to discuss how that would work in Minnesota, and again, why I asked for your support to study the merits of whether that would be a good route for Minnesota to make sure that it's accessible for more patients in terms of the cost savings for the patients, and also the benefits of that product in particular, because you can actually have the ability to deal with dosage and a lot easier than it is with the concentration as we currently have it in law.
Further discussion on the amendment. Senator Rosen.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Senator Franzen, I guess I'm just a little just confused. The commissioner can already talk about raw cannabis in the medical. So is this another backdoor amendment to have a task force or have a discussion about legalizing medical marijuana? If you could, if Senator Franzen would please yield on that.
Senator Franzen will yield. Senator Franzen.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Senator Rosen, medical program is already legal, so it's not a backdoor. It's this existing program. It's just to discuss whether Minnesota should include raw cannabis in the medical program. We discussed that a similar amendment in committee to just flat out use raw cannabis in the program. I'm not asking for that, and this amendment is just to discuss the merits. It's not I don't think there's a ban today, as you mentioned, but this would specifically direct this working group that's already in this bill to look at the merits of including raw cannabis and assess the public health benefits, whether it's something that would be helpful for patients and as well consumer safety and the cost for registered patients. So those are the main factors when you're adding, making changes to the medical cannabis law as it exists and within its very tight regulatory framework.
Senator Rosen.
Thank you, Mr. President. From what I understand, that law enforcement is opposed to using raw cannabis in this program. And the work group, I'm not even sure who is in this work group. I believe that what we have already dealing with the medical cannabis program is sufficient. It's working. We have checkpoints. And I believe just opening it up to raw cannabis is a whole nother ballgame. And Senator Franzen, I believe that we are not ignorant in this chamber about cannabis, whether it's medical cannabis or legalizing marijuana. We are very well abreast of what are the consequences. So another way of dealing with getting a little more into opening up this whole issue up, I'm totally opposed to, so I ask for you to not vote on the 109 amendment.
Further discussion on the amendment, Senator Dibble.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, members, I would strongly encourage a yes vote on the A109. I think Senator Rosen's fears are not well founded. I think Senator Franzen did a nice job of explaining that just because the medical cannabis program might be opened up to raw cannabis, it doesn't mean that it would be the full flower that would be smoked in the traditional sense that we might imagine. And furthermore, this is simply asking the work group to advise the legislature on on the advisability of it and the potential, and probably this is the most important, the potential cost savings for registered patients of the program. Members, we know that that has presented a significant barrier to people of access because of the cost, and there are no third-party payers in almost all instances. I think there are some instances with workers' compensation, but otherwise insurance and medical assistance and the like can't, and it can be very, very expensive. I can tell you that a good friend of mine, a good friend of the family's, passed away last November, and she suffered grievously in her final months and weeks. She had cancer and could have very well benefited from the use of medical cannabis, could not afford it. Because it's very expensive because of the processing, et cetera. And if, in fact, she could have accessed the raw form of the plant and, vaped it or consumed it in some other way, that would have been of great relief and great comfort to her. And I think it's a real shame that she unnecessarily suffered in those final hours. And so just some advice and some taking a look at this idea and bringing that information back. There's no harm in that, and it might open up the doors to more people to access some relief that otherwise they wouldn't have access to or would have to use opioids for, that do really have dire consequences, as we all know. Thank you, Mr. President.
Further discussion, Senator Rosen.
Thank you, Mr. President. And unfortunately, I just heard that perhaps my opinion is ill-founded and that I don't really understand this issue, and I totally understand this issue, members. I'm a fourth-generation Coloradoan, and my great-grandparents are buried there. My family lives there. I know exactly the consequences of legalizing marijuana. This amendment deals with an issue that has to be dealt with beyond a work group. Why is the cost of medical marijuana at this point expensive? It's not because it's not raw cannabis. So there are a lot of other issues that are dealing with the market. And so this work group is, as I said, another move to go through the back door to make sure that we keep opening up the ability to legalizing marijuana. And I can stand up here all day long and talk about what has happened to my home state and what my relatives...
Point of order, Mr. President.
Senator Franzen, please state your point of order.
I think Senator is trying to pin my motives of this bill, and I think that's against the rules of Masons.
And Mr. President?
Members, I don't know that she was provoking motives, but just a friendly reminder, keep your discussion to the bill and do not provoke motives on the floor. Senator Rosen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I had heard from Senator Dipple that my opinion was ill-founded. I am just going to say, members, that this is an area that needs to be very well vetted. Senator Lippert and Judiciary Committee has looked at marijuana very thoroughly, and having a work group just to look at raw cannabis, opening it up. We've talked about the Freedom to Breathe Act tonight. We've done a lot of issues with making sure that it is safe and secure with e-cigarettes, and it's just opening this whole program up.
Further discussion on the amendment. Senator Ingebrigtsen.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I don't want to belabor the thing too much longer here, but Senator Dibble, you and I bantered a lot before the medical marijuana came in, and at that time I said, and there were a lot of people, a lot of senators that are new that weren't there when I said, this is baby steps. We're just taking baby steps towards, we all know what we're after here, what you seem to be after, and that's recreational marijuana. And I think this is a back door. I really truly believe that, and I just, it's amazing to me that how uneducated we are when we see in the news media that in California, where it's been legal for quite some time, the black market has taken over so terribly much there that the governor had to call out the National Guard to assist the sheriffs in breaking up and locating and eradicating the black market marijuana, which will happen here in Minnesota as well if we go down this path. So, members, there's no real good reason to go down this path. We're nearly to the sore toe now when it comes to medical marijuana. We're about this close to adding that, and pretty soon it's just going to be everything. And I said this was going to come true, members, and it's happening right before our eyes. So, members, vote red on this. If we get a little more time, a little more information from the Colorados of the world and the Californias of the world, if you pay really close attention, you'll understand what we're talking about.
Further discussion on the amendment. Senator Franzen.
Thank you, members. I know it's late, but let's not confuse the issues. I'm talking about medical program, recreational. You already defeated that amendment to discuss it further. And I'm not saying we're ignorant. I'm saying we don't have enough information. I've been carrying one of the bills of many others. I don't have enough information. I need more information. So without the cooperation of members in this body, I'm just going to keep doing my research, and people are going to feed us information. But we could be doing it in a more efficient manner by having experts who already are working in this area can help us. And frankly, on the public safety argument, that public safety is against flower in the medical program, it could be the case. We can talk about it and discuss what are the merits of it, because I'm talking about cost and access for patients. It's already a program that's existing, and once we have something in law, like a medical cannabis program, we can always tweak it. And I don't think anyone has an exception, any program or anything that we never tweak again after we pass it. We actually have to do that, and that's our duty and our right as members here to make those changes to existing legislation. And frankly, also the businesses, now back to the medical program, the businesses in the medical program, there's only 2 dispensaries. They've actually, from what I can tell, support this move because it would help them drastically reduce costs and increase their profitability, because they're barely making any money, if at all, especially in the beginning of the years. In Colorado, Senator Rosen, happened 5 years ago, and I believe you were living here. So there's been a lot of things that are happening, and maybe you travel there quite a bit. That's probably fine, but living there is different than traveling there. And I've had plenty of research that
Point
I
of
can share
order.
with
Point of order.
members.
Mr. President,
Senator Rosen,
I
please
believe
state
that
your
was
point of order.
uncalled for, Senator Franzen, and my relatives, my family, live with the ruling in Colorado, and I can tell you about the consequences, and I have children out there, so I just would like you to refrain from that discussion.
Mr.
Members,
President.
let's not let's not go after each other personally. Let's keep it respectful on the Senate floor. It is getting late. Let's keep the discussion at the topic at hand, and let's keep it moving forward. Senator Franzen.
Mr. President, I have no idea what the travel habits of any of the members are. I'm just saying none of us live there. We live in Minnesota. We represent Minnesota. And it is our duty to get information to make best policy decisions we can. So having a task force to talk about what went on in Colorado, I have many things that would refute a lot of the arguments here. To say that we had a well-vetted committee and judiciary is far from the truth, and I'm not going to refrain from saying that. We barely talked about the merits of the recreational bill, but I am talking about medical cannabis and the merits of having this particular area of raw cannabis explored, whether we should move in that direction, whether we shouldn't, because we might have biases. We all do. I'm not saying we're going to, but why can't we have people and experts in our state government and legislature, including public safety, to tell us what the recommendations are? Why are we so scared of? This is a plant. Why are we so scared of it? Let's talk about it. Let's vet it. I just mentioned earlier, MIT and Harvard are taking money to discuss and research this issue. This is not taboo. We need more information, and I urge members to vote green to get it.
Further discussion, Senator Tomassoni.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I totally respect everybody's opinion on this, but this language is not scary language to anybody, because all it says is the work group shall also advise the legislature on the use of raw cannabis in the medical cannabis program, including an assessment on public health and consumer safety, as well as potential cost savings for registered patients of the program. I felt it necessary to read that because it seems to me that all we're doing is giving the work group a little bit more work to do, not going to legalize anything. We're not going to tell anybody that we will have cost savings. We're not going to tell anybody what the public health or consumer safety is, but the work group is going to advise the legislature what they find. And it seems to me that if we as a legislature can get more information on something like this from a work group that is already in the bill, then we shouldn't be afraid of it. The potential cost savings is something that people should know about, because the program is very expensive. The medical marijuana program is very expensive. It's something that works really well. But in order to afford it, you have to not only pay $200 cash up front to get authorized to go see a doctor who then will give you a prescription to go buy the medical marijuana. You have to bring cash to go buy the medical marijuana, and that costs anywhere from $250 to $500, even $700 a month. And that's a lot of cash for somebody to outlay for some kind of a medical issue that it can only be treated with this. And so I don't see why we would be afraid to let the work group take on one more task and give us some advice as to what they found when they studied this particular issue. And I would suggest a green vote on this.
Members, seeing no further discussion, the Secretary will take the roll on the amendment. All senators having voted who have the desire to vote, Secretary will close the roll. There being 30 ayes and 34 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted.